Well, let me say welcome to you all for joining us tonight. This is the third of a series of 3 artist talks for Pulped Under Pressure, which is currently on exhibit at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. If you missed the other 2 talks, we do have those posted online at paper.gatech.edu. They were phenomenal talks, and this one tonight I anticipate being just as great. So I encourage you to check that out. Tonight we'll be hearing from Jillian Bruschera and Marilyn Propp, 2 of the 7 artists that were featured in Pulped Under Pressure. So California native Jillian Bruschera is an interdisciplinary artist and arts activist who creates work in visual art, writing, public installation, body performance, and social practice. As founder and proprietor of the Mobile Mill, she travels teaching the art of hand paper making. She holds BAs in studio art and visual communications from Loyola, sorry about that, University of Chicago, and a MFA in interdisciplinary arts from Columbia College, Chicago, where she also served as adjunct faculty in the Center for Book and Paper Arts. And for Marilyn, raised in upstate New York, Chicago-based for 30 years and now living in Kenosha, Wisconsin, artist Marilyn Propp holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania and an MA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, the Brooklyn Museum Art School, Provincetown Workshop, and San Francisco Art Institute's pre-MFA program. In 1990, she co-founded Anchor Graphics Chicago, a nonprofit print shop, which is now Anchor Press Paper and Print in Milwaukee, where she teaches paper making workshops. Propp is taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, Loyola University, Columbia College, Chicago, and Carthage College, Wisconsin. Among her visiting artists and residencies are the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Sil Releg in Ireland, Gentel, Wyoming, and the University of Veracruz in Mexico. Exhibitions include the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking, Dorsky Gallery curatorial programs in Long Island City, New York, Illinois Wesleyan University, Bloomington, Illinois, Galleria AP, University of Veracruz in Jalapa, Mexico, Columbia University School of the Arts, DePaul Art Museum in Chicago, Bellevue Arts Museum, Washington, Trout Museum of Art in Appleton, Wisconsin, Monmouth Museum, and a host of other locations. She's received numerous grants and awards, including the Racine Art Museum Fellowship, the Illinois Arts Council Finalist Award, and Adolph and Esther Gottlieb Foundation grant. Her work is among national, international, and private collections, including the DePaul Art Museum, the Mary and Lee Block Museum of Art in Evanston, Summer Palace in Saudi Arabia, Amnesty International, and the Hallmark Collection, as well as AT&T Collections in Kansas City. Her ongoing work, Notes from the Sea, explores relief prints, collage on shaped handmade pigmented paper, and reflects the coexistence between the industrial and the natural worlds, where industrial debris, machine parts, and marine life are entangled or morph into one another. And the next person you'll hear is Marilyn Propp.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I am going to start my slideshow. So before I begin, I would love to thank Jerusha. She's been wonderful, exhibition coordinator, and Anna, the education curator, and Virginia Howell, the museum director. I also want to thank Melissa Potter and Rennie Gower for continuing to exhibit Pulped Under Pressure at venues across the country. My current work, Notes from the Sea, as Jerusha had noted, are relief prints on handmade paper. The images, they're made up of layers of intertwining and overlapping machine parts that represent industrial debris which block or hinder the marine life. The machine parts are morphing into organic forms like diatoms and sea plants and sea creatures. I print directly onto the paper and also cut out and collage the prints. All right, so let's see, I'm gonna skip my intro then. You can see it all right there. Let me go back to, there's my website, you can see that. All right, so Notes from the Sea really began around 2010 after the Gulf oil spill. Before this, I'd been reading about Dutch shell oil spoiling of the Niger Delta. And I also had been visiting my family down in the Gulf of Mexico for many years. So when the BP Gulf oil spill occurred, it was a very personal thing for me, although I was horrified by what was happening in the Niger Delta with the ecological destruction. So I began to paint images. Well, this particular one, Deep Sea Drifters, has the dead sea creatures and pipes with oil spilling out from them. As a painter, I have been a painter for over 50 years. I would begin with gestural calligraphic marks. These particular paintings were in 12 puzzle pieces that fit together to form a circle. The calligraphic marks would create movement, and that's how I would develop my forms. So here I am continuing to paint on this work, which enabled me to create a whole painting while at the same time working in individual smaller parts. This is that finished painting, Paradise Lost. The pipelines in the Niger Delta were destroying the mangrove forests, polluting the land, and an activist, Ken Saro-Wiwa, was actually hanged with other activists for trying to bring attention to Shell's destruction of the environment. So this really got me going on this topic of Notes from the Sea. I also began re-exploring my woodblock prints using the same format as the paintings. You can see on the left, the industrial waste is beginning to become biomorphic forms. On the right, you'll see the sea turtles climbing up the side, and on the left, a large sea turtle entering into the image. I began to use sea turtles because they represented threats to the oceans. They're endangered due to habitat loss, plastics in the ocean, overexploitation, and climate change. Scientists tag them in order to track their movements so they can create a map of the areas that the turtles travel through. They're also, interestingly enough, they're an ancient symbol of creativity, longevity, endurance, and persistence. And they journey for great distances and persevere through obstacles, which I felt was a perfect metaphor for not only my studio practice, but most artists that I know. This piece is in the exhibit at the museum, Ghost Divers. I taught at Columbia College, Chicago, from about 2002 to 2017. In 2013, I decided to take some papermaking classes at the Center for Book and Paper Arts. In fact, Jillian, I think, was one of my teachers at the time. She was a graduate student. And papermaking seemed to me to be more fulfilling for what I was trying to do with this idea of the underwater world. It had the look and the characteristics of that world. And so these are some of my first paper pieces that I made at Columbia College. Each is approximately 30 by 30 inches. I would do three different things. I put pigment in the water while the pulp was in the water. I would also take my gloved hands and put it into pure pigment and drag it through the water. And that's how I got the trailing effect on the left. The right one shows where I would lay a grid over the forming paper and put pulp, pigmented pulp into that to create texture and kind of a gridded effect. These are some of those early pieces that I'd made at the Center for Book and Paper Arts with the woodblock prints printed on them. And you can see some of the gridding areas as well. This is a recent piece, Treacherous Waters, 2022. On the left, you can get a sense of the scale of these pieces. This one's 39 by 39 inches. And again, you can see the sea life is entangled or blocked by the machine parts and industrial debris, which are morphing into organic forms. I pull my handmade sheets using a decal box, which is the squared object that's hooked top and bottom on the left. I create this paper during the summer in my home studio. Here's some of the finished paper drying in the sun. And here's the decal box with the pigmented pulp inside and the pigment in the squeezy bottles and also in the jars. If you're interested in how I make these large sheets of paper, I have a YouTube video, a tutorial, and it's basically called Large Sheet Papermaking by Marilyn Propp. So you can look that up, and it's about a 5-minute video. A large part of my work is printing my images on handmade paper. So I do print directly on the large sheets, but I also print on smaller sheets and cut them out and collage them onto the large sheets. So you can see some of my shapes that have been cut out here. It reminds me of when I was a little girl and I visited my grandmother, and she would give me a Fuller Brush Company catalog, and I would cut out, I was probably 5 years old, and I would cut out squeezy bottles or different kinds of objects, and they became real to me. They became three-dimensional. And so when I began to cut out my prints, it was that same feeling of joy that here I am cutting out these objects. And so I particularly enjoy doing that and collaging it onto the large prints. The passages of color on my large sheets actually direct where I'm going to place my imagery. So this one's called Connectors, and you can see the pipes intertwining and overlapping. Also, the circular format enables me to create circular movement. So there's a lot of energy and movement going around and around. And I very, very rarely place anything horizontally or vertically. Everything is placed on a diagonal to create that dynamic energy. I also add semicircular additions along the edges, which suggests cell division. This is a small diver series, and these are some of the pieces that are at the museum now in the Pulped Under Pressure show. These are all approximately 10 by 17 inches. This is one of the Pulped Under Pressure venues for the Pearl Fincher Museum of Fine Arts in Texas, and they used all my work as the entrance wall. These are smaller individual pieces. I'm becoming very fond of the rotor shape in the centerpiece, so I've been using that quite a bit lately. The piece on the left is abaca. Abaca is made from a plant similar to the banana plant from the Philippines. When you beat that pulp for for hours, it becomes very translucent and crinkly. It has a rattly sound to it. So the one on the bottom is actually cotton and abaca. It's a little sturdier. Abaca is a very durable fiber, more so than cotton. More of these pieces that are approximately 10 by 18, 9 by 16. I began to create a series called Free Fall. It's within the Notes from the Sea. And these are larger sheets of paper that I had made that I began to paint on, and I began to collage and print on top of. These two, the paper has actually been painted with acrylic washes. They're pretty complex layering, create the sense of chaos and a sense of the industrial debris blocking the movement of the sea life. Free Fall 10 on the left is very translucent also. Free Fall 7 on the right the background has been painted with acrylic, but pretty much the same idea that these forms are floating throughout the space, in and out of the space, obstructing the sea life as it tries to move through that underwater seascape. This piece is also very translucent, and you can see on the right is the work in the glass case and the rest of the work that was presented in When Print Meets Paper at the Museum of Papermaking. And this piece was installed in the window of the Grove Gallery in Milwaukee, along with a solo show of my work, so that the light would come through the piece. The Sixth Extinction is one of my recent works. The Sixth Extinction is actually us. We as human beings are creating all of this loss of species or human activity, and it is essentially the sixth of great extinctions that have happened. And scientists believe we're in the middle of this one. Those are my rotors moving through. In Obstruction Destruction, you see this form, which is similar to a plastic bottle. It's one of my favorite objects. It actually has been morphed into an organic form, like an ocean plant or some kind of life form derived from a plastic bottle. You can see on the left piece where the pulp painting actually creates areas that direct where I want to put my shapes, spewing out of the pipes in some instances. When I was in Chicago, I created assemblages from found objects, mostly crushed tailpipes and other detritus from the Chicago alleys and streets. So all of these assemblages began to come into play. I had them up on my walls here in Wisconsin, and I had one piece of metal left, and I used that to become the fin of this tortoise, of this sea turtle. And it kind of combines that idea of the metal obstructing the objects and actually morphing into the creatures. These are called Mending the World, Part 1 and 2. They're all created from beach detritus found along Lake Michigan and netting. and shell games, my most recent work, and then After the Pipeline, both of which have the cellular forms around the outside. I also have been teaching paper making since I moved up to Wisconsin, and this was my class at Carthage College in Kenosha. Their final project had both casting and sewn books. It was a really terrific class. They would do stenciling, pigmenting, watermarks, casting, and they learned to beat pulp on my portable Hollander beater. The image on the right shows a student work. She cut up and made pulp out of her partner's military uniform and created this watermark on her formed paper. We also, my husband and I co-founded Anchor Graphics Chicago from 1990 to 2015. Before we opened our print shop in Milwaukee in the fall of 2022, we were donated this truck. And so like Jillian, we started taking papermaking and printmaking out into the community. And we called it our POW, our Press on Wheels. And on the left, we're working with high school students. Here we took our POW to the bindery in Milwaukee, a letterpress studio. And this is quintessential make a sheet, take a sheet that we would always do at our Press on Wheels. I would have paper making on one corner, and we would have paper that had been previously made, but they couldn't take that until they actually made a sheet. So I would help them make a sheet. I'd show them how to do it. They'd pick out their paper, they'd pick out a block, they'd pick out their ink, and they'd take it over to David, and he'd roll it up. They would crank it for the press, and they'd get to take it home with them. So it was this whole long process. And, but in this case of the bindery, they then went into the bindery, used the letterpress, the Vandercook press, and created these one-of-a-kind images, which they signed. It was very successful. Here's one of our projects in Chicago, North Branch projects. And here we're up at MOA, the Museum of Wisconsin Art in West Bend. I took over the print aspect here, and David, my spouse, started making the paper on the other end. We've also done many other POW events, including the Veterans Peace Project in Madison, Wisconsin, where we again cut up and beat a vet's uniform into pulp to make paper, and various other venues. Here we are at MARN, the Milwaukee Artist Resource Network, with the all-day paper making workshop. And you can see on the screen above, that's my video of making large sheets of paper with the decal box. So that was running while they were all making their paper. All of my workshops, I have them using pigment and pigmented pulp in a bottle. So they're pulp painting as well, using different shapes of paper as well. And stenciling, the whole works. We usually have about 5 hours. Here's one of my 2 classes at Anchor Press Paper and Print, our new nonprofit printmaking studio in Milwaukee, which actually opened in the fall of 2022. So I'll be teaching more of these this summer and in the fall. Here we have our future urban leaders, high school kids, and kids that are 4K through 2nd grade, running the presses, which is great fun. And this is the print shop that we founded. And that's about it. There's the website for Anchor Press Paper and Print, and you can find my work at propjonesstudio.com. So thanks, everybody. If you have any questions, be sure to ask away. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marilyn.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we'll hear from Jillian, and after Jillian, we'll open up to questions.
Good evening. I'm Jillian Bruschera. I want to echo the thank yous to Teresa and Anna in Virginia at the Papermaking Museum, and also to our curators, Rennie and Melissa. And I'm happy to present with Marilyn tonight because, yes, you were in my first papermaking class, and I love when things come full circle. And I remember you making some of those early pieces. It's like it was yesterday, but it was 10 years ago. Whew. And all this was 10 years ago. So the work I want to present tonight is sort of the development of the mobile mill, being that it is a project now that's been running for a little over 10 years. It's the project I get the most questions about. People want to know how it happened. So I'm going to switch over to a screen share and take it away. All right, that's me. Many years ago with the mobile mill in one of its early iterations. I have always been an artist my whole life. I was trained by my mother and grandmother as a drawer and a painter, and somehow found myself in art school in Chicago, some of the same institutions Marilyn's mentioned previously. Columbia College, being the place we both were, had a Center for Book and Paper Arts. I knew about bookmaking, I knew about printmaking. I had never heard about this thing, papermaking. I've always been someone that works on a surface. And when I learned how to make paper, actually from Melissa Potter, who's the curator of Pulped Under Pressure, I got really excited about this idea that you could embed objects inside of the paper and use it sculpturally and just think more about what it could be than just a flat surface. I love working with scraps. Recycling is a huge part of my artistic ethos. So these papers are what I would call waste made. I would go into like the pulp trash and the sinks and the drains around Columbia and grab all the scraps from other students and professors working in the room and remix them into new sheets of paper. I would also collect lots of waste from my own life and my habits, whether that's junk mail or magazines or cardboard boxes, and pulp those things down and reconstitute them into new sheets of paper. And I just got totally hooked, as I'm sure many folks on the line who have papermaking experience would empathize with. Once you get your hands in the water and you start playing with that pulp, it's like you never turn back. And then you want to make everything into pulp, right? So that was what started the journey. I also started teaching papermaking. And during my time as a graduate student, we, as a group of students and professors, actually got to launch a project on the campus called the Papermaker's Garden. This picture doesn't really illustrate the garden in full bloom because this was, I think, the spring in Chicago and nothing is alive at that time of year. But I did start taking my students down to the garden space to make paper. And this was actually almost an early iteration of the mobile mill. So I had this deep interest in bringing papermaking outside of the classroom space, behind closed doors, out into public space. So my class was a guinea pig class. We took our tools and pulped down to the garden and made sheets right on the spot. And I think it's fun to look back on these photos and just acknowledge that I'm more or less doing the same thing 10 years later with different people across the country. The early iterations of the mobile mill, I had big dreams. The food truck culture was really popular in Chicago. This was like 2012. So naturally I was figuring out how could I get my hands on a post truck or a delivery truck, and how would I raise money and how could I outfit it? I had some pretty lavish ideas, some more kind of earthy ideas of a bicycle powered beater. This was a pretty lavish idea. The truck itself would be a beater. I don't know how that would be built, but I just started dreaming about what could happen. And naturally, what happens is what you're able to afford. And I did do a Kickstarter fundraiser to raise some money. And essentially what I ended up with was a pickup truck, which I still have, a camper shell, and this push cart, as illustrated in the slide here. It's essentially a cart from like a metal fabrication shop with rubber casters for wheels. And I worked with my brother and another friend named Bill from out in California, who's like a 70-year-old just MacGyver. He's an artist and a home builder, and he can build anything. And he helped me bring my idea to life. So this pushcart system is largely influenced by him. I did get a critter beater, which goes on top of the cart. As you can see here, I'm able to do live demonstrations of pulp making. This was an event actually at Trisha's gallery in Chicago. I'm blanking on the name of it right now. Gallery, I'm gonna be in trouble for not remembering this. Anyway, papermaking in the streets, okay? So grabbing people from the community who don't even know they're going to be part of this. I just set up shop and folks kind of wander over and ask what we're doing, and they start to get involved. Here's at Kala Arts in Berkeley, setting up on the front lawn. So the cart contains everything you need for paper making. Depending on if I have access to electricity, I can make pulp on the spot. And if I don't have electricity, I pre-make the pulp. Here, you know, students, I think we made pulp that day, and they're casting their own sheets of paper out in the garden, which is always a nice place to work. This work also made it to the beach. This was a group of Chicago summer campers. It was fun to make sandpaper, essentially. Of course, you give kids pulp and put them in a giant sandbox, and the sand is going to end up inside of the pulp. But this just shows you kind of the variety of places I was able and continue to be able to take the project, which is quite fun. In 2015, Melissa Potter invited me to assist her on a Fulbright fellowship in Bosnia. And the big question was, can you bring the mobile mill? And I found a way to do it. And that was essentially just by making everything miniature. So this is the prototype for what evolved into the Papermaker's Pack. It's a mobile papermaking kit for international papermaking travel. I used an old briefcase that was my grandfather's and fitted it with small molded decals that I built by hand and small other accessories that you need for paper making. So I kept it really minimal. There was a small blender, some felts and pellons and rags and clothespins. I do all my pressing and drying, I guess, with my hands and pushing papers between metal sheets, hanging them up to dry in the sun. So when it's cold or wintry, I'm a little limited in my abilities unless we're working inside with a heater. These are some shots from the work we did in Bosnia. The project was called Pulp and Pastry, and it was a collaborative effort between Melissa Potter and Adam Pantic, who was an artist out of Serbia. This was a fun project that explored the intersection of pita making and paper making. So I think I was at grad school at this time where social practice was kind of coming into play in the craft world. And a lot of artists, including Melissa, were sort of exploring these ideas of taking craft into the public sphere. So I was very influenced by the folks working around me and the projects I was collaborating on. Some of the gallery shows we were putting together at the time, one included social paper. It was a big overview of different papermaking artists who work in the public sphere. So that would include projects like combat paper. I know we referenced earlier this idea of making paper from military cargo. So, or excuse me, camo. Anywho, we made paper like this, had I forgot the name of the plants, but the paper wasn't edible. I guess that's just the point I wanted to make. But we made small papers with the little paper makers packs. They're about postcard size, and lots of experimentation with folks coming into our little pop-up studio and trying to make paper while they enjoyed eating pita bread and talking about sort of cultural intersections. This is where that Papermaker's Pack went next. I moved back to California after traveling with the mobile mill for several years across America, making lots of pit stops, including at Georgia Tech to work with students. I got a little tired, I guess, of being rootless and always saying goodbye. I really wanted to settle down, and so I did end up back in California. And one of my huge takeaways from traveling with this project was I would go to all these different communities and share this amazing knowledge and these tools, and people would fall in love with the paper making. And then I would pack up and they would say, hey, how do we keep doing this? How do we do this on our own? So that's where I decided to take the Papermakers level or Papermakers pack up to, I guess, the next level. So my brother and I worked to produce a small edition of these kits. As you can see here, there's a carrying case that doubles as a vat, and the vat's activated with your work. I use these kits mostly for my workshops now. So over the years, I think I've gotten a little tired of carrying an 80-pound critter beater from A to B. So going a little smaller has been helpful for me, and I've been able to kind of get into the smaller nooks and crannies of society. You can do a lot more with a suitcase than you can with a car. But that said, it's all really the same. So that's the broad story. If you have questions, want to know anything more specific about what I mentioned, please let us know in the Q&A.
Thank you, Jillian.
Welcome. Yes.
So we had a couple of questions that popped up during the presentations. Someone asked, how do you decide what fibers to use? I think this was typed during Marilyn's presentation. Jillian, you mentioned that you're working with recycled materials. Yeah.
Yeah, for my own work, I use cotton and abaca exclusively because it's easy for me to buy the linters and then put them in my beater. I have the same kind of critter beater that Jillian has, and I can pulp that pretty easily. But when we do our press on wheels, I would use recycled office paper of different colors and put them in the shredder, put them in the blender, and then make it out of recycled paper, essentially. I actually love doing that almost better because you get all these little speckles and sometimes words pop up from the shredded paper.
Jillian, are you mixing anything with your recycled material? Like, are you adding any abaca or any cotton or other things, or is it all 100% recycled?
I do everything recycled, and if I want to make a certain color, I just curate my pile. So any pink scraps will go in the pink bucket, blue scraps in the blue bucket. Yeah, I like to work with the material as it is. And as Marilyn said, I like, especially when I work with things that have text on them, I love when those kind of found objects and images and words start to, I don't know, just appear on the papers that you make. All natural. Way to go.
Yeah.
The chat is asking, Jillian, do you sell those cases?
I do. And I'll drop my email in the chat. You can message me about that there.
Marilyn, someone asked, are you exhibiting in scientific institutions like the National Academy of Sciences? It seems like a natural union of humanities, art, and science.
Oh, no, I haven't even thought about doing that. Thank you for that. That's a great idea.
So I had a couple of questions for you guys, just regarding Marilyn, you were painting like the images that you showed of the paintings that were sectional. Mm-hmm. That still looked like handmade paper to me. Were you painting on handmade paper? Were you using someone else's handmade paper? Or was that some other?
No, I actually, when we lived in Kansas City in the 80s, I would go out and sit on front lawns and do pastel drawings. And I think the drawings translated into the paintings. So a lot of people think my paintings look like pastel drawings, but I didn't really, when I was painting on wood panels, no, I wasn't making paper at all.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question there.
Because when you said the first class that you took with the paper making, I was really surprised because the earlier works, it looked like I just assumed they were handmade paper.
No, they
There
were
were like rough edges and there was texture.
Yeah. No, they were actually plywood that I would cut out with my scroll saw and build a frame on the back of each one, and then sand the edges and then try to fit them together as best I could. So they were all on wood panels.
And I'm curious, like you guys had a connection. Did you have connections with the other artists in the show? Like what was, because it seems like it's quite a small but mighty community in terms of paper makers.
Jillian, do you want to jump in on that one, or shall I start it out and you complete it?
I'll try. A majority of us are students of the Center for Book and Paper at Columbia College Chicago. So I was in school with Trisha, who's in the show, and Maggie Puckett, as well as Marilyn, who I guess, you were a continuing education student when you were in my class, but then you were a student.
But I was a faculty member at Columbia College. Yeah.
Melissa Potter was a professor at Columbia College. Rennie Gower is connected to Melissa through, I think, curating projects. I don't know if Rennie taught.
She did a residency.
Yeah, Rennie was a resident at the Center for Book and Paper when I was interim director of the gallery there.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And so I was running around documenting her work, and so she invited me to be part of this exhibit, which was wonderful. And I think Rennie was Melissa's teacher. And,
I think so too.
Yeah. So we were all at the Center for Book and Paper around the same time. I was there learning to make paper, but I was actually teaching in the art and design department down the street from the center. So Rennie just gathered us all up and invited us to be part of this. And it's been going, since 2016, I think.
Almost 10 years ago. Maggie Puckett was another student. Julia Goodman was an artist that I researched when I was a curatorial assistant for Melissa. She was on, I think, the West Coast at the time, and we invited her to show in the social paper show, and then she just kind of became part of the group and ended up at Columbia College as a visiting professor. I think.
Artist, yeah.
So yes, everyone is connected through Chicago. That is the short answer.
I just had to ask, because when we originally got the show, I didn't realize all of the ways in which you all were connected. You know, so often things are curated and the artists have no relation to one another, just connected by the curator's vision. But it seems like there was a good amount of overlap happening and synthesizing.
Right, yes.
Oh, and I see Rennie is on there, on here, if you want to put your 2 cents in.
Right. I mean, I was invited by Mel to come out when another curatorial project of mine called Paper Cuts was on view, which Marilyn hung in the gallery. And that's where I met everyone but Jillian, because Jillian had already left. But,
hit the road.
But I met you through Melissa, and I was so excited by the work that I had accomplished at that residency that I looked for ways to show it, and I had the opportunity to do that if I would include artist-made books in the project too. And so then I went back to Mel and I said, well, what do you think? Can we do something? And she thought it was great, and we've collaborated on lots of things since she was my former student, a long time ago. So yeah, there is a lot of synergy and connection between all of us, but primarily through Columbia College Chicago. So it was a great center, great opportunity. Sadly, no longer really doing it. But anyway, thank you for letting me add my 2 cents.
Well, you know, you're the curator of the show. We of course want to hear from you.
Well, couldn't have done it without Melissa. I mean, she's really the rock star of papermaking, and learned a lot through her, and just the community that she gathers around herself is really commendable. And so that's a celebration of that. The show is really a celebration of that.
Awesome. Kind of talking about piggybacking on that idea of community, Jillian, you mentioned, you go into, and Marilyn, you going into these spots and introducing people to paper making, and then, it's packed up. And how have you had an opportunity to come back through some of those locations that you were at earlier and seen like any evidence of that practice continuing?
Gosh, I haven't really seen that. I mean, I know that in my papermaking class at Anchor Press Paper and Print, the same people want to take the class over and over again. And some of them who came in had already been doing it. And we would go back a lot of times with our press on wheels, but I don't know what happened to all those people. I don't know if they continued with papermaking or not. Jillian, what about you?
Well, I've been so many places now that, of course, I've lost track of everything, but I will say that I do stay connected to some of these communities through social media, specifically an Instagram account. So after I make a visit and folks start following me, I tend to follow them back because I'm curious if papermaking will pop up for them later. And it does. There's actually an artist locally in Sacramento who I taught how to make paper last year. And I noticed the last couple of weeks online, she's been posting tons about papermaking. I think she's going to pursue some sort of a residency. So it's really nice to know that you've opened a door for somebody. I just assume it will happen, but it is nice to see that follow up. As well, some of the larger institutions that I work with that have a budget to afford a papermaker's pack, oftentimes they have purchased one from me so that after the course that I teach, students then have tools in their art inventory on site that they can return to and make some paper from. So I have to hope that they're being used, if they've been paid for and put up in some sort of a library or another access point. But it's fun to know that the craft is carried on. And I think as we just express a little bit just through this show, which actually is all female show, which is cool, but artists helping other artists, right? And craft has always historically been something that mostly is passed down through language and physical motion, right? So we're showing each other how to do things, and we have to keep spreading it that way. We're lucky to have online resources that we can, like Marilyn has a video up of how to use a decal box. These are really incredible things that we have. And if we all keep adding to the web, we just have to assume the work's being done.
I find it interesting, your emphasis on craft, right? In that, just like you walk through the exhibition, and to me that's like all fine art. It's so amazing what you're doing, and I'm curious. I guess I'm curious. How are you defining craft, and why is it important to emphasize that this is a craft? Right? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, I'm coming at it from the opposite end, Jerusha. I always was a painter, and now everyone's painting and there are painting shows everywhere. And I put my paints away when I moved to Wisconsin because my studio was in the second floor of our house. I didn't want fumes in the house. It just wasn't working for me anymore. And after 50 years, I put it away. So I don't consider my work as craft. I feel like it's an extension of my painting. And it's also got a lot to do with printmaking. Printmaking also is sort of a poor cousin where printmakers, photographers, craftspeople don't get into the big painting shows, they're all considered lesser, but they're not at all. I mean, printmakers are remarkable. And so I consider myself now a paper maker and a printmaker. I don't see it as a craft.
And I think I use the word craft loosely to cover any like activities, art activities that involve hand making things by hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would include painting as a, you have craft, skill-based craft in every media area. It's not,
right.
I mean, craft has always been bandied around as sort of, second-rate citizen, but to make good art, you've got to know how to do it. And so that's where craft comes in, the ability to make something well with quality and intention, content, all of it.
I'm just playing devil's advocate. I mean, I'm coming from printmaking background and textiles and, those kinds of, in paper, so, but I thought it was worth asking because craft can be a very weighted term. And so it's always good to kind of understand the definition or how you're perceiving it when you're using, or how the person that's using it is perceiving that term.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Rennie that without knowing your craft, you're not going to get much. It takes years and years to learn your craft, and it takes years and years to combine craft with ideas and how to make them come together as one. Yeah, I think you're right. Craft has gotten a kind of a bad rap. The word itself.
Well, how are you guys feeling about the future of papermaking? Like, do you feel like it's a growing community, or are we kind of in a holding pattern? Are we dwindling? What's your perspective about the community?
I think I answered part of this question a little bit earlier. And I want to note that I'm excited that more folks are learning about papermaking through the internet. Because before, I do think you would have had to have some sort of access or privilege point to make it into maybe an art program, and then, even fall down further the rabbit hole to get into a papermaking classroom. It is not very commonplace. I mean, paper is something we use everywhere in our lives, but very few people think about it. How do you make it? Where does it come from? People say, oh, it comes from trees. But on the level that we do papermaking, it is a very small niche world. And, we're all like 1 degree of separation of knowing each other in this book and paper world. So I get excited, again, when I'm on the internet and finding other artists that are floating around out there, or find me and my information and they ask me about papermaking. I just assume it's growing due to those resources.
Yeah, when we founded Anchor Press Paper and Print, which is actually a continuation of Anchor Graphics, which it got shut down from Columbia College about the same time as the Center for Book and Paper Arts. And so Columbia gave us all our equipment, and it was trucked up to Milwaukee. So when we found a space and COVID was over and we started our shop again, it was just going to be Anchor Press. And I said, no, it's got to be paper. So we became Anchor Press Paper and Print, or AP3. And I've been really pushing the papermaking classes, and it seems like people are really interested. So I think it's kind of on the upswing. People want to get their hands in that water, and they want to make paper. And they want to know about not just paper from trees. They want to know about cotton. What's the difference? Why is it cotton paper? Why is it abaco? What are all these different fibers? So I think it's on the upswing.
And are you seeing a wide range in terms of the demographic, like the people who are taking classes with you, or is it a lot of younger folks, or like retired folks? Like who are you seeing coming through, like self-selecting in terms of making paper?
When my workshops, it's from, I would say, ages 20s to 60s, that range. So, but I teach little kids also, and they love it. So it's kind of everybody, the whole range.
I'd say it's the same. There's no specific demographic. I think at this point, when I'm doing a public event, it's whoever walks up is welcome to participate. And it seems like as long as you have some usable motor skills and you can pick up the tool, you can do it. I mean, I think I've taught someone as young as like 3 years old, and I probably had someone in the classroom in their 90s. And I don't know, I just love that every time I teach a class, at the end, there's always someone that says like, this was the most amazing thing. I'm so glad I learned this. And there's just never been someone that's like, I hated this, it was hard. Like, it's easy and it's fun to make a sheet of paper. Granted, there's technical things if you wanted to do some pulp stenciling, you know, there's a little more skill and patience involved, but to just get your hands in the pulp and make some magic happen is fairly accessible once you're standing in front of the vat. And that's what's super exciting about teaching it.
Well, it is 9 o'clock. I do have one last question for you, Jillian. You have these amazing bricks in the exhibition that unfortunately folks didn't get to see in your presentation, but you can go online and see photos of the exhibit as it shows, as it appears at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. But are you still making bricks? I love how like it's such a simple structure, but so dynamic because you can build, you know, in so many different configurations.
Yes, I still make them, and I make them actually mostly for a very practical reason, and that's I need to have backup pulp. So I started making the bricks as to have kindling for my campfires when I was traveling, just because it was like easy to do and it was cheaper than me buying firewood, but obviously it took time to make the kindling. It was a wash. But now I'll make them, so when I'm done with a session, or if I'm making a big batch of pulp, I make the bricks in advance so that I have them in my kits to rehydrate and reconstitute as pulp for paper making. Yeah, well, still doing it.
Yeah, that's your installation. Like, we just have to like keep eyes, because that's the area that, especially little hands, they want to like beeline straight for the bricks. So
I mean, Rennie would say probably no to this, but I'm like okay with people touching that art. I don't know. If it happened, there's not much you can do to mess up a pulp brick unless you like put water on it or light it on fire. So I maybe in the next iteration it'll be more interactive, but actually I have to thank Rennie for the fact that it did become more modular, because when I created this idea of have the bricks in the show, she was like, how do you want to set them up? And then we were like, oh, well, anyway, let's let them do whatever they want. And then a good curator said, you have to give them some instructions or else they're just going to get the pile of bricks and not really know what to do. And so it's fun to give a little guidance. And then I think we've probably seen a couple things stemming out from, you know, how to set up the bricks, people doing it in other forms. And that's totally awesome.
Well, it gets set up differently at every venue, you know, and so it's really fun to see how the different curators on site assemble those bricks, because they're all individual bricks. The first time you showed it, you had it all screwed together. And
yes,
when it came back to me, I had to unscrew it all and make them separate. But now they travel in modular bricks. And I've seen it in, you made a great little instruction sheet with lots of variations, and I've seen variations on your variations as this thing has traveled. It's great.
They're like Legos.
Yeah. And Marilyn, people are always commenting on how your pieces float off of the wall. Like that's I love how that's displayed. I've heard that so many times, just kind of walking through and hearing people talk to their, you know, whoever they're in the gallery with. Yeah.
You know, recently I've made I paint the drywall screws white, but recently in shows I make them only 2 inches so the pieces only come out 1 inch from the wall. But you're saying you're getting a response with them really coming out far. So maybe I should go back to that again. Those are like 3 or 4 inch drywall screws.
Yeah, they love that they float. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that any of you would like to share or comment on before I make those closing statements?
Just thank you for this opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
So I just want to reiterate that this was the third of a series of talks. So the talks with the other 5 artists are on our website at paper.gatech.edu. If you enjoyed seeing this talk, we do accept donations. If you want to help us be able to provide this free programming. And then just flashing up there are some shots of the work installed at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. You can find the Paper Museum on social media. So our website, again, paper.gatech.edu, but we're also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And if you'd like to get our newsletters so that you know in your email when programs are coming up, shoot an email to our education curator, anna.dahl@rbi.gatech.edu. This is a phenomenal show. And Rennie, can you remind me where the show is going after it leaves Atlanta? Is it Iowa?
It's going to, university, Iowa State University.
Yeah. So folks in Iowa, get ready. It's coming to you. But this show is up through August 4th. And I also would like to thank our presenters today, Jillian Bruschera and Marilyn Propp. It's great. It's always great to hear artists talking about and sharing their work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And that's a wrap. Good night. Thanks everyone that joined us. Please tell your friends about it because it will be available online to go back and see.
Thank you. Thanks, Jerusha. Thanks very much.